Ready, Marty? Mr. President, when World War... Mr. President, when World War II ended, we began to dismantle immediately the greatest military machine the world had ever seen. You were unhappy about it, and General Marshall was unhappy about it. Was there anything more you could have done to prevent it?
Nothing whatever, for the simple reason that every mama and every papa and every kid's grandmother in the country wanted him home at once, and every kid wanted to go home at once. And we did the best we could. We tried to have a discharge program on a merit basis, that is, by points. And the thing began to break down, and we just had to face it and let it happen, but it was a disastrous thing to do.
In retrospect, might it not have been better if the grand strategy had followed Mr. Churchill's advice and come up through the so-called soft underbelly than the way we did it?
Well, yes, of course, that would have been the best way. It's by hindsight. Foresight, as I told you before, was used to keep Russia in the war and keep them from making a separate peace with Hitler. And the deal that was made at Potsdam. And I carried it out to the letter, and Churchill, of course, had to go along because he signed the agreement. But it's all right to talk about what might have been after it was over. But, of course, if the boundary line could have been east of Poland, all our troubles would have failed to happen after the situation was over. But as it developed, the Russians had 7 million men on that front, and they could very nearly do as they pleased. We didn't want to go to war with Russia, and we were finishing up with Hitler at that time.
Is it your opinion that in times of crisis it may be useful in our system to have an informal coalition government?
Well, I don't think the coalition government can be organized here. We can have a bipartisan arrangement so that the two parties are in agreement with what happens. But the President of the United States is the chief executive and the commander-in-chief of the armed forces, and he is the government in an emergency of that sort, along with certain acts which the Congress has to pass, and which they always do without hesitation. That's as near a coalition government as we could ever get.
Have you ever given any thought to the possibility or the workability of the British cabinet responsibility system in this country?
Yes, I have, and I don't think it would work. I don't think it would work until we'd had a long time training at it. Our present government is the best one in the world, and it works all right when you have a man at the head of it that knows what he's doing.
Well, if you have probably done more negotiating directly and indirectly than any president in the history of our country. What is the art of negotiating with foreign powers?
Just the same as you negotiate with your home people. You want to have a policy that you're anxious to have carried through. And you negotiate with the other fellow and find out what his policy is and what he wants to do, and try to see if you can't find common ground on which to work. But I want to say to you that I think President Roosevelt did more negotiating than I did, although the wind-up of the wars caused me to have to do a great deal of it, and I have to pass on a great many things. One of the most important things that I had to pass on were the various provisions of the United Nations Charter. Mr. Stettinius, who was the Secretary of State at that time, called me up every night and discussed every paragraph of that United Nations Charter, and sometimes we thought we were never going to get the thing worked through. In fact, I had to send Harry Hopkins to Moscow to make the Russians line up and endorse the United Nations Charter even after it was agreed to.
I wonder if you give us your impression of some of the people with whom you've had to deal in the international field. Let's start with Stalin.
Well, Stalin at Potsdam impressed me very favorably. He was easy to get along with. He was easy to negotiate with. And when the time came for an agreement, he had no hesitation in agreeing. And whenever he agreed to anything today, he didn't bring it up again tomorrow. Churchill had a habit of arguing about everything that came up. He made a speech on nearly every provision that came up, and a good speech. But he'd try every day to bring up something that had been passed on yesterday. And on one occasion, particularly, I remember, they were discussing the agreement which was made on free elections. in the countries that are now behind the Iron Curtain. And Churchill was making about a 15-minute speech. He was going about that long. Stalin leaned on his elbow and pulled his mustache like this. He said, Mr. Prime Minister, why don't you agree? We and Americans have agreed, and you're going to.
What about General de Gaulle? Say that you presided over a great revolution by consent in terms of our foreign policy, because up to the beginning of the war, we had no formal military alliances. Now we have them scattered all around the world. Were you compelled by events, or was this a deliberate decision on your part?
It was a deliberate decision on my part, and the events helped the decision tremendously. We completely reversed the isolationist policy of the United States and gave the United States a foreign policy which put us at the head of the free nations of the world, made us the leaders of